Appreciate you being here with us on Birds 365. McMullen, McDonald, and Mike Gill from down the shore. He's got Devils. I see Devils. What's the T-shirt today, Mr. Gill?
I'll go in Arizona State.
Arizona State, Party School USA. There it is. That's
Arizona State was out there when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, which, according to all the talk today, doesn't seem to be attainable in 2024.
No, not if Nick has anything.
We're already pulling the plug, baby. Pull the plug.
Yeah, but Nick Sirianni.
I thought about this the other day in that in 2022, I might have brought this up last week. I don't remember, but 2022, remember, they didn't beat anybody. They weren't any good, and they made the Super Bowl. So were they really good last year and fall apart, or did they just suck from the year before?
Yeah, well, nobody plays. You and I have had that discussion. Nobody plays anybody. Right? I mean, nobody plays because nobody's of value. So,
well, in 2023, they actually beat the Chiefs, the Bills, Dallas, Miami. Yeah. They had good wins all year. So were they not? I'm somewhat being playful here, but it is a bizarre puzzle to put together when you think of it. Like, this team in 2022 makes the Super Bowl, and the detractors. I'm not saying everybody. You know, you would get the random Dallas fans that live in this area. Where I live, there's a lot of crossover with Giants fans, and nobody took the Eagles. Yeah, they didn't beat anybody all year. Well, you made the Super Bowl. Who gives a shit who you beat? You're in the Super Bowl. And then in 2023, they're 10-1, and you're like, well, maybe they are actually pretty good. Or maybe they're not good. They keep winning games, but they don't look good. And then they just crumble and fall apart. And it was like, see, that team was never any good. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, and Nick Sirianni did say yesterday that he doesn't have to go far back into his memory when he can think of the time when the Eagles had the best culture that he's ever been around. And I'm sure he's thinking of 2022 when he says that, even though they might not have beaten a murderer's row of teams. Hey, the culture was great. Okay, isn't culture something that's sustained? Isn't that one of the reasons why you build a culture? Because you have that as your foundation and you build on that. How did the culture crater this year, Coach? He didn't really have an answer to that, did he, Mike?
No, and, you know, he did mention he tried to go back to that, which here's the difference. And this is where this is kind of interesting for me, is the makeup of the team is different. And it's almost like Major League. And I hate to bring Hurts into this, but when Charlie Sheen's character, Ricky Vaughn, gets paid the money, he's not the same pitcher anymore. And everybody starts to look at him a little differently. Now, I don't know that people looked at Hurts differently. That's not kind of being, you know, what I'm feeling anyway, but maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe they said this guy got paid all of a sudden. He's not the same guy. What happened to the guy that was always fighting and constantly trying to get there? And now that he's got there, he's not the same. I mean, I don't know. I don't. You look around this team, you had a lot of changes on the defensive side of the ball. Was there somebody that left on that side of the ball that made the culture of that side? You talk about the culture. You had 2 new coordinators, multiple different coaches on this team, and a plethora of new players. So, yeah, you might look at the head coach and say, hey, how could you not have kept this? But as he talked about yesterday himself, you can't lead every guy the same way. You get new people in here, you've got to handle them differently, and it takes a while to figure out who could be handled this way, who could be handled that way, and they might not have just ever figured it out.
Yeah, I you know, the one thing that resonated with me with Nick was that talk about leadership and the talk about Jalen Hurts, and where I think he's right. You know, if you're leading people, Mike, as the brand manager, program director, whatever, you know, is somebody going to come up to you and say, all right, stop being Mike Gill. You got to be this guy. You got, to me, it's dumb. You know, you got to be yourself. And that's what Nick said. You know, from his standpoint, I think, and again, we're all reading between the lines. I think what he was trying to get across was the culture bad? I don't know if the culture was bad. They just lost a bunch of games. And, you know, the difference between winning and losing in this league is ultra small. we always talk about parity. It's real. The difference between Kansas City and Carolina is not as big as people think it is. Obviously, it has to do with a few core players, but you can turn things around quickly in the NFL. We see it all the time. If you make right decisions, if you get the right player, if you can turn around things very quickly because everybody's got good players, and you can go in a negative direction really quickly, as the Eagles kind of showed. But the leadership aspect, I agree with Nick. Where I agree with Nick is, why are you asking Jalen Hurts to be a different person? That doesn't make sense to me. Then you're not authentic. Then you come across as something more. I think that creates more problems. If you're not being yourself, you can't be a leader if you're not being yourself, can you?
No, and it's funny. He said there's not a book on how to be a leader. There's plenty of books, but all of them say different things in it. That's
You got
the
a whole
thing.
section at
Right,
Barnes
you
and
could
Noble.
go and go down to whatever bookstore that they
Yeah.
still exist and find how to be a leader
Yeah.
by so and so, and it's all different. But you're right in that if you're telling Jalen Hurts you've got to change your leadership style, well then see the weird part about that is the offense didn't change. Like that locker room stayed almost exactly the same for Jalen Hurts. So you would think that that group would have been closer and not be like nobody was different in there. There wasn't. I mean, is Isaac Seumalo, was he missed that much, or Miles Sanders? Were those two guys such prominent voices? Now, does the quarterback also lead the 53-man roster? And was there defections on defense that he did? I can't see that being like the sole reason. The offensive ineptitude, and that's maybe ineptitude is too strong of a word, but the offensive struggles is the more perplexing thing than anything. On the defensive side of the ball, you have a new coordinator. He comes in late. He doesn't get his chance to bring his own staff in, so he's kind of scrambling around because he's here late. Then they replace the guy. That side's a dumpster. But still, the fact that the offense lacked fluidity all season long and still produced, yet didn't look fluid in doing so, to me is still perplexing, and have not gotten a real solid answer. I know yesterday we were laughing. I was on a show last night, and the host was asking about the combine and GMs and coaches talking. And I said, the Philly GM and coach didn't say one thing about that combine. Nobody cares about that combine right now. They want to know what the hell happened, and there's still not an answer.
Right. And to their credit, they both manned up and took the questions that they did. But Eagle fans don't feel any better about it because I don't think they had the answers. I don't know that there are any answers.
I don't think they know the answer.
Exactly. So you're going to ask them 100 times, but they're going to talk around it and they're not going to give you what you want. But here's the one question I have for you, John. And you would be more capable of answering it than either Mike or myself because you're there. You're around the team. But I don't know that you can even answer this question. Do we know for a fact, and Mike kind of hinted at this, do we know for a fact that Jalen didn't change? That because he got $250 million, that he was exactly the same guy and led in the same fashion that he did the year before that they went to the Super Bowl?
Well, I no, number one, we can't because he's very closed off. He's very stoic, as we all say. But, the people criticizing him are the ones who are saying he didn't change. So, but that's kind of baked into it, and that he should have changed because the circumstances were different. So they're arguing he should have changed and he didn't. And I'm just speaking of the critics. From everything I hear, the work ethic and all that kind of stuff. To me, that's the importance of Jalen Hurts' leadership and the fact, some people lead by example, which Nick was kind of saying as well. Some people are very vocal. He's very vocal. He's very energetic. He's very emotional. He gets criticized for his emotion. People are different. I don't think Jalen Hurts changed. Now, because of the contract, did his offseason change? Yes. And and that perhaps hurt him. I've heard that from a couple of circles. He didn't spend as much time
You
in
know, I said that the day he signed. The only
his
thing that scared me was his commitment to his offseason work, that he might be pulled in too many different directions.
yeah,
And after
and
the
then
season, a
that's
whole bunch of people
That he
chalked up
might
his
be
bad
pulled
season
in
to that.
too many directions. I never was
pulled.
worried
Yes,
about
pulled.
Hurts
That's a good
himself
phrase, Jody.
not having enough
Yes.
focus, but having other people say,
Yes.
hey, but
You got to do this endorsement. You got to do this endorsement. You're
Right.
one of the faces of the league. That's a good way. I'm glad you said that, Jody. Pulled in different directions, because I don't think it was him being. You know what? I'm going to go get a bunch of endorsements. I don't think it was Jalen Hurts centric. I think it was.
but the
pulled.
question, I guess, moving forward with that is, how do you combat that? I mean, you're Jalen Hurts, you're a $250 million quarterback. Are they going away? Is Hulu not doing live sports anymore?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, and that's about time management and things like that. You just got to handle it, I think, a little bit better. And you got to make as Jalen would say, the main thing, the main thing. So you got to do what you need to do. And then, all right, if you got time, bring it on Hulu, bring it on whatever other endorsement. So I think, yeah. I think, by the way, he learned from that. He probably learned from that. And he probably will, because he knows he's got to bounce back. I don't think there's any question about that.
All right, Mike Gill, I want to ask you one of the things that Nick Sirianni said that kind of raised a red flag for me and caught my attention as soon as he said it, because even though I consider myself a Nick defender more than a Nick detractor, a whole bunch of people calling for Nick's head on a platter. I was not among them. I thought that they could thread the needle and clean up the coaching staff, yet keep Sirianni in place. But one thing we did find out about Nick this year, when he deems necessary or the organization deems necessary, he's very willing, ready, and able to lie, because he did about his change at defensive coordinator. He sends poor Sean Desai up there to field questions on a Tuesday as the defense coordinator, when the players knew on Monday Matt Patricia's going to be calling the plays come the Seattle game. So when necessary, Nick can flat out lie or misstate the truth.
Still the craziest aspect of the whole season. That, by the way, that Sean Desai, bizarre.
Did not make sense to me. And right or wrong, he took the bullet at the end of the season, and even more so after the season was over and done with that postseason sit down with Howie. He goes, "That was my call." He made that very apparent. That wasn't an organization thing. That wasn't a suggestion. He made the call and had to go get the blessing of those above him to do what he did to poor Sean Desai. I still don't know if I 100% believe that. I believe it more than I don't believe it. He sold me on that to an extent to go, do I believe him or not? I got to go with tentative, yeah. Did you know that Nick Sirianni hired the new offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles? Did you know that was his
he
call?
said that yesterday. He was
said
like,
that yesterday. When I hired Kellen Moore, and Nick has been very poignant about his use of pronouns, because it was my offense until it became our offense. So he's been very good at changing pronouns when necessary. Yesterday was when I hired Kellen Moore. You buying that, Gill?
That's a good question. Am I like the one thing though about Sirianni that I have where I'm like you, Jody, I'm willing to give the guy the benefit. When they hired the guy, I mean, at the time the team seemed to be a mess, and you hire this young guy, and you're like, where did they even find this guy? I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Fine. And what made me kind of lean towards Nick as, okay, this guy gets it, is when the team was 2-5, and he said, we got to scrap this and start running the ball. Like, he understood what we are and what we can't do. And I give him a lot of credit for that year of giving up the play calling and totally shifting the offense to a more run-oriented offense. And that got that team that probably had no business being in the playoffs to the playoffs. The very next year, they grow from a 9-8 wild card team to a Super Bowl. Legitimately, we're probably the better team in the game. So I do think Nick is adjustable and adaptable. John, you would probably know how stubborn he is more so than I don't view the guy as like some stubborn ox that's just unwilling to move. So when he says, I hired him, did he look at himself and say, look, we're at the point of the 2-5 team where I got to change something or it's my ass, and that he was willing to bring in a guy like Kellen Moore, who, quite frankly, has a lot of different principles than he does, right? I mean, Kellen Moore's offense doesn't look a lot like Nick Sirianni's offense. So I don't find it to be so far-fetched, although I guess it's so ingrained in our minds, Jody, that Nick is the puppet and that this organization's front office pulls all the strings.
I mentioned this on yesterday's show, and I joked Albert Breer will probably, because Peter King's not around anymore, Albert will probably confirm this 6 years from now, and everybody will finally believe it. So to Jody's point, he said, I hired Kellen Moore. Yes, Nick Sirianni hired Kellen Moore. Now, there's a layered aspect to it in that he was told he had to hire somebody. He was told he had to go outside the family, so to speak, to get a new play caller. So there's some caveats put on it. And then you get the group of candidates and how he's responsible for that. So that's his part in it. And that's where you hear Cliff Kingsbury and ended up being Kellen Moore. And those were the two top candidates and everybody else they interviewed. So it's, people have their roles, but to this point, Nick Sirianni has been given the rope, whatever, to hire the coaches. So the candidates are there, and then it's up to Nick who he wants to hire. Now, from a couple reports, from what I heard, a couple other people heard, number one on the list was Cliff Kingsbury. And at the time we said Cliff wanted too much autonomy and the Eagles had to go in a different direction. Not that they were going to hire him, but when they interviewed him, he was probably the leader in the clubhouse. That didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time because I was thinking, well, Lurie's going to probably force him to fire a bunch of people, to scapegoat a bunch of people. Ended up, no, everybody's back essentially, with the exception of the quarterback coach and the offensive coordinator. So it was very targeted. So you all have all these Nick Sirianni people. And I'm saying, well, if Cliff Kingsbury is complaining about not wanting Jeff Stoutland, all right, there's the door. I get it. But no, it was not only Jeff Stoutland. It was the running backs coach, the wide receivers coach, the tight end coach. Everybody's coming back except the play caller and the quarterback coach. So it was very targeted. Nick did hire him, but there was that layered aspect of it, as you have to go outside the family. You cannot, if we're up to Nick, Brian Johnson would be here. So that's the layered aspect of it.
Right. Like, as they always say, it's a collaborative decision. Everybody, so it's like the battles of who makes the lineup for the baseball team. Is it the manager? Is it the front office? They all sit down and look at the freaking numbers and they put together the lineup for the day based on who's pitching and that guy's numbers against them, yada, yada. This is a similar situation. You can't bring Brian Johnson back. Pick 5 guys that you like, and we'll go that route. And I'm sure, these are guys that Nick probably had some approval of, even if you're, no, he had nothing to do with this. He had to have some say of, hey, I would be interested in these 5 guys.
John, let me
ask. Totally surprised, Jody, to hear him hearing him say, I heard what you heard. And I was like, well, that was kind of interesting. Like, because we all just assume, again, I go back to that. We'd all just assume that Howie and Jeffrey run everything.
And even if not run everything, be a strong guiding hand. I was very surprised by his use of the word I. And John, you mentioned Kingsbury, and he may at one point have been, we know he was interviewed first before Kellen Moore. So if that makes him the number one choice because he's had an interview and nobody else has, so be it. Did anyone else get a formal interview? And I'm talking about actually showing up on campus, not a Zoom thing, other than Kingsbury and Moore. Did they have
for coordinate? Remember, for coordinators, you have to interview people. You have to. The Rooney Rule extends to coordinators now. So I had the list. I forget the list now, but I'll try to look it up. But yeah, they interview. It wasn't just Cliff Kingsbury and Kellen Moore. And you have to interview people by rules. So, but they were the two. It was, as it explained to me, it wasn't even I don't want to say they wanted to hire Cliff Kingsbury. I would say it was 1A and 1B. And then when things went in a negative direction with Cliff Kingsbury, they quickly went to Kellen Moore and sewed it up. So it's not like they didn't like Kellen Moore, and they could have went further in the second interview with Cliff Kingsbury, might have said something else they didn't like. They might have shifted to Kellen Moore. So I'm not saying they wanted Cliff Kingsbury above all else. Just he was sort of the leader in the clubhouse. And at the time, it was explained to me about autonomy. And that surprised me because I immediately went to Stoutland. Well, who doesn't, who would complain about having Jeff Stoutland as their offensive line coach? And the answer is probably nobody, and probably not Cliff Kingsbury either, but everybody else was coming along as well. The entire offensive coaching staff, essentially, besides the quarterback coach and the actual coordinator job.
Mike, let me run something by you that kind of surprised me from Howie Roseman yesterday. I want to get back to something John and I were discussing about the championship guys and how they're handled, Kelsey and Cox and BG. But even before that, another guy who I thought knew he was going to be asked about and was interested to see what he said was James Bradberry. And he went down the road of, we might have screwed up Bradberry's season by playing him at the nickel in the early stages in camp. And how many snaps did he get in nickel in actual games, John? Like the first couple weeks, maybe a handful?
Way too many. That when first
the Tampa game.
Yeah, I way too many. I'll look it up though. But
well, there was I guess this was 2 or 3 weeks ago. We have the segment on my show, Football at 4, with the Inside the Birds guys, and Jeff Mosher was on saying, they're reporting that somebody in the secondary, they didn't even talk to the coach, and I have to imagine by process of elimination, it almost says James Bradberry did not get along with Sean Desai and did not like his role in the defense. So I find that whole Bradberry thing, because everybody just assumes, right, Jody, they're going to find a way to get rid of him. Mm-hmm. He's got $9 million contract. And Howie Rose was like, no, he's in our plans. And I'm wondering if they saw and said, this guy has more left in the tank. They just used him poorly. And we don't view that spot as a place we need to upgrade, because we're all assuming, they'll go out and get L'Jarius Sneed, or they'll draft a young corner. That doesn't mean they don't have to draft a young corner. Both of those guys are in their 30s. But do the Eagles view Bradberry as a guy who's lost a couple steps and fell off, or that he was just used wrong by the two defensive coordinators that they had?
I remember when they were talking about it in training camp, and the number was 127, Jody. He played 127 snaps in the slot.
That's over 17 games. It's not a lot, but those 127 weren't spread over 17 games. No. They were in a group of games early on in the season. So maybe Howie had the right to use that as an explanation.
Yeah, and I've said that on the show. And by the way, when Slade went hurt, they moved him to left corner. They were moving him all over the place, and it didn't make sense for what type of player he was. So from that standpoint, I've argued if you want to play devil's advocate, just put him at right corner, let him play zone with Vic Fangio, and I bet he has a bounce back year. Is he going to be a second team All-Pro? Probably not, but I bet he has a bounce back year. So from the Eagles' perspective, I think it's about, look, he's under contract, is how he said. It's a big number. You can't, if you do release him, it's got to be post June 1st anyway. So why not wait? It's not the best thing for the player. If the draft board falls your way and you're able to get one of the top corners that you like in the draft in the first round, all right, then you release him post June 1st and go in a different direction. But if you can't, If the board falls in a different direction, you got James Bradberry's probably going to have a bounce back season with
Well,
a
what
good
are we
defensive
supposed to
coordinator.
make? What are we supposed to make, if anything, then of Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey complaining about the way Vic Fangio used them last year?
Well, I brought that up on yesterday's show as well. What that tells you is stop talking about Snead, who the Chiefs are talking about tagging and trading. The Eagles, Louisiana Tech guys are supposedly texting him. You don't want Snead. You don't want to pay $19 million for a zone corner. That's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. And you as you bring up Jalen Ramsey, what does Jalen Ramsey do well? He might be the best press corner and cover corner in football. Not happy in that defense. Xavier Howard, big time player, press corner in his prime. Not happy in that defense. What makes you think Snead's going to be happy in that defense, coming off what he was able to do in Kansas City?
Then the question is, will Slay and Bradberry like their roles in this defense?
Well, Bradberry will love it. Will Slay love it? Probably not.
I guess then, John,
but he's already been in it. Slay.
But here's my question to you, John. Was this not a Fangio defense this year? I get it. Yes. The man himself is going to be coaching it. So it was a Fangio defense. So Bradberry sucked in a Fangio defense. Why are we going to believe just because Fangio comes in and is actually going to be the guy on the headsets that he's going to?
Because Fangio, one of the criticisms about Sean Desai was he threw too much at the players, and he took it to a ludicrous degree as far as coverages. And you heard it from Slay twice after the Rams game, after the first Cowboys game. You heard it from Kevin Byard. You got to simplify this, especially for the younger players. The point that I was trying to make about Bradberry from day one in training camp when they moved him, I'm like, why are you moving James Bradberry to the slot? Even why? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's Jody. Your question was essentially, did Gannon run something different that Fangio runs? That runs something different. They all have their tweaks, but you would think the coverages would be pretty uniform, no?
Right.
My argument, and there's maybe Bradberry lost a step. Maybe he's not the same. He's at that age where you have to start thinking seriously that maybe the decline is here. I'm not saying 100%, but I'm saying Fangio.
But he looked like he lost 2 steps. I mean,
that's possible. And then you have an issue, and that's where the evaluation comes in. But Fangio, I think, is smart enough to say, all right, you're playing right corner, sit out there and play. And I think that helps Bradberry. That's all I'm saying.
How much more man this year, John, would you say they ran as compared to last year with Gannon and the amount that he ran zone? And how much more zone or man do you think they'll play this year with Fangio? Comparing this past year to the year before it and projecting forward.
They're all, if you look at the blitz rates, it's the same scheme. They'll just be better prepared for it. They'll just do it better. But the numbers
they didn't
will
play
be very,
more man this year. That would be an inaccurate statement.
No, that would be an inaccurate. What they did was they moved people around all over the place. And they probably threw, instead of just, playing quarters, they're playing quarters, cover 2, cover 6. They're going back and forth too much. And that creates miscommunication. And I think that is sort of the problem with, I think, what was going on. And you heard it from Slay, as I said, on 2 occasions. You heard it from Kevin Byard as well late in the season. Too much trying to be, the smartest guy in the room, trying to do, I'm going to catch him, I'm going to fool him, instead of just playing sound, fundamental technique football.
It's the guy that goes on Shark Tank with a great idea and then starts telling the sharks about the 5 other ideas he has. They're like, no, whoa, you got a good idea right here. Let's not go with the other 5 just yet. You got the $10 million.
And especially when you have to play. When you have to play Sidney Brown, who's a safety playing slot corner, when you have to play Eli Ricks playing slot corner, when you have to young players, when you have to bring in Kaylee Ringo late in the season, and you're throwing all this stuff at these guys, and you see all these busted coverages,
Yeah.
that's where I think they had an issue with Sean Desai.
And oh, by the way, I'll give Howie a little bit of credit and a nod here. He took a bullet for that yesterday. He said,
You did.
"Yeah, maybe I didn't give them enough to work with."
You and Andy Reid. I got to do a better job.
Right, with the slot corners, because shockingly, Avonte Maddox got hurt. Who could have seen that happening?
Yeah.
Well,
As in
Jody,
everybody.
Jody, you're a baseball guy. The Eagles over a period of time, it was like a baseball GM saying, "Throw me a single A arm in every trade, and just so I can maybe." I mean, they got like a Tay Gowan and a Mac McCain. And
I love a Mac
trade,
McCain reference.
Every trade had some corner in it, and none of them panned out.
Gary Vincent Jr. Don't forget Gary Vincent Jr.
I went as far back as I gave you Mac McCain and Tay Gowan. Come on.
That was very good. Very good.
Both guys who thanks for the memories. I would agree with. All right. Speaking of thanks for the memories, are we going to be saying that about Hassan Reddick in the next 2 or 3 months? Yesterday, Howie had the chance to kind of stem the tide. Best case scenario, we got a deal done with Hassan. He didn't. He went off on a tangent about, hey, he's a Philly guy, he's a Camden guy, he's a Temple guy. It's nice that you've got his resume down, Howie, but I don't care about his resume. I care about being an Eagle Green again next year. He didn't exactly give me confidence that this is going to be a negotiating ploy by allowing him to go out and check his value on the open market that's going to end up with a favorable result for Hassan Reddick staying in Philadelphia.
And Sirianni, same thing. He kind of just repeated himself over and over and over. If you watch Ryan Poles give his exhortation about the field situation, he pretty much answered it every which way without saying, we're going to trade him by the end of the week here. Like, what other choice do I have? Roseman seemingly passed it over to Sirianni to say the same thing. Like, guys, we want him back here, but you never know what's going to happen. And there was no firm, we want him and we'll do whatever we need to take. We'll talk to Hassan. I got more of the feeling of, if we get the right deal, we'll take it.
Yeah. Same with, I got the feeling it's about budget, and if it goes to a certain number, they don't want him back. That's kind of the feeling I get. What feeling did you get when, and not even about Jason Kelce, because we know Jason Kelce is either going to play for the Eagles or he's going to be in the broadcast booth somewhere, but Fletcher Cox, I think, it was more open-ended. He might go play somewhere else, but Howie kind of said, you know what? If he's not going to play, it's going to be in this uniform or not. What did you take of that assessment? And does that lean you towards Fletcher's probably going to retire? Because in the same conversation, Howie was talking about how many good young defensive tackles he has, and those guys got to play.
Yeah. The Fletcher, because I had Fletcher on at the Super Bowl, and he was sitting right across from me. So I tried to read some body language. He looked like a guy
with that. Fletcher.
Yeah, good luck with that is right. He was wearing a camo with a hat, and he sat back, and he gave no indication. He said, "You never know, don't know, you never know." I asked him 4 different ways. We tried to get something out of him, and he just would not budge. With Fletcher, you had the feeling last couple years when he had been, they released him and then they brought him back. And then last year that he would go someplace else, that he would get an offer and go somewhere. And I still think that he probably could get that offer and go. But I do think it's whether or not he wants to keep playing or not is the bigger thing here. Now, after last year, you would wonder, why is that even a question? And you would think the Eagles could use him on a lesser role. But the question, I guess, for him is, does he want to play at a lesser role salary? That's the bigger thing for Fletcher for me. Does he want to be the guy that is Brandon Graham, 1 year, $4.5 million or $8 million, even to, I think Fletcher thinks that he's still a big money player. And I don't know that.
And oh, by the way, are you going to disagree with him on that? Quick question for John McMullen and Mike Gill. Who is the most consistent defensive player for the Philadelphia Eagles this year. Not best, most consistent defensive player for the Philadelphia Eagles.
I mean, Fletcher is in the conversation. If it's not him, he's in the conversation. No question. And the big questions for me, man, I know we got to probably get ready to roll, but there's so many things with Fangio. How does he view Jordan Davis? Does he say, that's a guy I can't wait to get my hands on? Does he look at Jalen Carter and say, that's a guy? Now, I figure he wants to get Jalen Carter.
Yeah, everybody
Carter and Davis coexist together in his mind. And if you bring Fletcher Cox back, what does that do to Davis? Because I think what Fangio views from Davis is a big key here. Does he say 20% snaps, Busteroni, first-round pick?
Stupid. No, he sees this. I know what Bick sees with Jordan Davis. He sees Akeem Hicks.
There we go.
He sees Akeem Hicks, hopefully, who he had in Chicago. But with Jalen Carter, yeah. But Jody's point to consistency, yeah, probably was the most consistent Eagle. It was a bad defensive year, and Slay was hurt.
So how do you ask your most consistent player? Yeah, we're gonna need you to take a hometown discount now. Even though there's a team out there that's willing to pay you $10 million again next year, we're gonna ask you to play for $5 million for us. If I'm Fletcher Cox, I got something to sell to you here. Yeah, no, I'm not taking a hometown discount. I was the most consistent player on your defense, and you want me to take a pay cut? No, thank you. Someone else is willing to make me whole? No, thank you. I know how he said, well, we got to keep him in our uniform. Well, you're not showing me the love by asking me to play for less, Mike Gill. If you're Fletcher Cox, why would you say, yeah, fine, give me whatever you want. I got to play one more year, and I got to do it.
I don't
buy that.
I don't think he's in the Brandon Graham camp where he just wants to come back just to accrue seasons under his belt for whatever price the two sides are willing to agree on. I think Fletcher's saying, I'll play, but I'm not playing just as a guy dog and pony show here to wave to the sideline. I'm playing because you want to play me. You want me to be a part of the rotation.
Yeah. At Mike Gill's show, make sure you follow Mike on X, Twitter, the Sports Bash every afternoon. If you're local in South Jersey, 97.3, you can listen to Mike there. Since we were talking about Fletcher, I'll end it with Vic Fangio. Howie was asked, is Vic going to have a big import on personnel? And he kind of chuckled. He thinks so.
He thinks he will.
Think so.
What did you think? I mean, look, Howie's going to take what Vic wants into account, but Howie's going to take, and I think he kind of proved that. Is that the way you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the way I described it is Sean Desai got here late and didn't have a big voice to say, these are the guys I like. These are the guys I need. These are the guys that I've fit my system. Vic Fangio can come in and I think has a big enough presence and voice and relationship with Howie that he's been here enough to say, hey, Howie, I'm telling you, if you can get insert name Van Ginkel, I know what he can be in this defense. Let's go get him. We're decide who could he have really vouched for last year? Who was he going to go out? There's multiple guys on the free agent market who have played for Vic Fangio. I mean, Josie Jewell, hey, there's a linebacker in Denver, Howie. We need a linebacker. I'm telling you, you get that guy, and that will change the – so he's got a much stronger case, and that's based on multiple things. He's been around the league. You have more context when he got here as opposed to Desai. So he's got a lot of built-in advantages.
All right, last one for me, Mike, and I'm going to ask you a question that I'll ask you again next week, and the week after that, and the week after that, and the week after that, all the way up until the first game of the season. And feel free to change your mind on a weekly basis if you so desire. But I need an answer today. I don't think Nick Sirianni gave DeAndre Swift a whole hell of a lot of support yesterday. He was asked about the running game, and he said, we run the football pretty damn well every single year. In other words,
sounds like Mike Gill and Jody McDonald can run, and we're going to have a top 10 running.
Yeah, I was a pretty good running back at one point, man.
Yeah, not yours truly. So it wasn't a ringing endorsement of bringing Swift back. So the question is this week, next week, the week after, the man who will get most touches out of the backfield, either handed it to him, tossed to him, flipped to him, whatever else, for the Philadelphia Eagles next year will be who, Mike Gill?
Well, it's funny because yesterday he did mention Gainwell. Is that the Trey Sermon mention that you got mentioned in?
Now they love Kenny. That's legit.
Right.
They love
Well,
Kenny.
remember last year he mentioned, so he went out of his way to mention Trey Sermon.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
don't
all
even
the
ask
time.
him about Trey Sermon.
Just
Where
go
did
to
that come from?
Default Trey Sermon. When in doubt, default to Trey Sermon.
We talked about running backs last week because I mentioned Eckler and Pollard, and nobody got tagged. So that'll be another story because I don't think any of those running backs are going to get what they want. So,
and that brings down the cost for Swift because Swift is not
exactly. That's something I discussed yesterday. Is now Swift's price has to go down because there's 5 other guys whose price who just went down. So for week 1, if you're asking me,
timeout Philadelphia, timeout NFL. I think that's a misnomer. Ooh, if a guy doesn't get tagged, that means everybody's price goes down. No, it doesn't. It just means the pieces are going to move around the board. The Giants could have, or we'll use Pollard because Mike said Pollard. The Cowboys could have tagged Pollard. They didn't. Well, guess what? Now, if they can't retain Pollard, they need a back. So they're going to pay for a back. You didn't create a way of all
not 12 million. They're not.
Oh,
Well, I understand, but somebody's got to be your lead back going into
no.
the season, right?
My only point in bringing that up is those 5 guys on the market, those 4 or 5 guys on the market,
and there are 4 or 5 more teams on the market for a lead back who would have not needed a lead back if they had franchised their guys. So the market stays the same.
Yeah, I see. I disagree because
it's not monetarily.
Whether it's Dallas, yes. If they sign Tony Pollard, and it doesn't create a new role if they go out and get Saquon Barkley, or whether they're not going to. But you get my point. It doesn't create those 5 guys are going first, are getting more money. Maybe not Eckler, because Eckler's had a really down year, a lot of touches, a lot of tread off the tire. Maybe not Eckler, but the big 4, they're getting more money. Then that's all I mean. That doesn't matter where it lands. Same amount of teams are going to be looking for running backs, but those guys are getting more money than DeAndre Swift. And that, in theory, should bring the price down for DeAndre, at least a little bit.
Yeah, I don't agree with that theory. I think his money will be what his money is. There is the same number of teams that need the same number of
last year, Sanders got what, $6 million a year?
6.5, basically.
Yeah. The Swift is that's the over under, Jody.
Yeah, Swift is going to be under that. But Swift was going to be under that if Barkley got tagged and Jacobs got tagged and Eckler got tagged and Henry got tagged. He's going to be under anyway. He's not getting Miles got the money. It didn't come close to hurting the money. So the league as a whole is going to go.
Yeah, that probably
why
hurt.
Would we go there?
DeAndre. Yeah,
that had a bigger effect on what DeAndre is going to make than what DeAndre did or what other guys did or didn't get tagged.
And by the way, I don't necessarily know if DeAndre Swift wants to come back. I think the assumption is because he's a Billy guy that he wants to come back because he had a career year. I do not think he likes the way he was used in this offense. And they're going to have to do some lobbying about the passing game. Now, maybe they can do that with Kellen Moore, who's got a bigger history of getting the ball to the back. Maybe they can say, we're going to get you the ball. But I don't even know if DeAndre wants to come back, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Boston Scott was the highest paid back on this team last year. I guess, what's the limit of how high? Like, even if Swift said, I want to be back and I'll take less, even if he says I'll take less, that number is probably higher than the Eagles want to pay.
That's true too. So I think it's unlikely he returns. I do, but we'll see.
And then I will second guess the Eagles. I'm sorry. They have devalued the running back. You're telling me that DeAndre Swift, well, give me the numbers, both of you 2 guys. What do you think is the top dollar value the Eagles will go for a running back anywhere?
3-4 million.
I was going to say 3.5. 3.5.
Top
money. And that's why I said last week, a guy like Eckler, if he's just sitting there and nobody, and he's still hanging out in the 3rd phase of free agency, that's where you say, hey, $3.5 million for a year. You come play here. You know the offense. And that's how they end up with a guy
All right,
like
well,
that.
then I'll ask each of you guys. Same price tag, $3.5 million. Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift. They both want to play. They're both willing to take $3.5 million as their salary. Which one would you prefer for the Eagles?
I would take Swift because I
take
think
Swift.
I think Eckler is.
I think
I think he's washed. I think the Eagles should avoid him at all costs. He
So,
is. He is.
You go with the pandering because, I think a lot of people would hear the name Eckler and get excited and think that he's a big addition. But I think Swift, and I'm not the biggest Swift guy in the world either, but I think Swift's a better, more dynamic.
Eckler's turning 29 in May. So, number one, he's getting near 30 for the running back position. He's touched it over 1,400 times. I would run from him. If you have a running back, have him run from Austin Eckler.
Yeah.
I don't think the Eagles will even think about Austin Eckler.
So you think Kellen Moore is going to have less to say about? Well, but Kellen was only there for 1 year, and Eckler went backwards on him.
By the way, I think a lot of people. That's another thing. I think a lot of people. And I know we're keeping it. I apologize, Mike. I think a lot of people assume because somebody was with somebody at some spot. Kellen Moore saw Austin Eckler average 3.5 yards per carry. He might be the first guy saying, "Guess what, guys? He's not the same player."
Right.
Exactly right. Mike Gill, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much. You look good in your Arizona colors this week. Can't wait to see what you roll out for us next week. The well-traveled Mike Gill here with us on Birds 365. We'll catch Mike next week.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
You guys.
Birds fans, here's your chance to save up to 40% on your car insurance right now from one of JAKIB Sports' great partners. Here's what you need to do. Call one of the two managing general partners, Jim or Fran, and tell them you're a friend of JAKIB Sports and Birds 365.
My name is Fran Salerno, and I'm a managing director here at Del Valle Insurance Group. Been in the business for over 36 years, saving people money on their insurance needs. Give us a call. Let us help you custom design an insurance plan that meets both your needs and budget.
Go to get your